3 out of 5 causes of death in America are inflammatory health conditions. How many health conditions can I look at Max and tell him there are this many health conditions associated with inflammation, and I have a study to back up every single one of them? And I found over 130.
Wow.
If you heal the gut microbes, which can happen quite quickly, then they can fix the gut barrier for us. By the way, every 3 to 5 days, you install a brand new gut barrier. The immune system is the third layer of defense. The first is your gut microbiome.
What is the normal amount that a person should be pooping on a daily basis?
So generally speaking, most of us would poop once a day. And if you are in circadian alignment, pooping is a part of that story. There are things that occur in the morning. You tack on some morning exercise. I've now given, by the way, your listeners the 2 most powerful circadian levers for a morning routine: outdoor time and exercise of any variety. Your gut is a muscle. It can be trained. It can be made stronger. Fiber is exercise for your gut. This is the equivalent of that gut muscle working out. Fiber is the longevity nutrient from my perspective. And the reason why is because...
Dr. Will B., welcome back to the show. How you doing?
Oh, I'm good, man. It's great to see you. I'm pumped.
I'm so glad to have you. The conversation that we had the first time you were on my show was unexpectedly one of my favorite conversations that I've had thus far on this podcast. It was excellent. And I love that you challenged me and I challenged you, and it was friendly, and we had a debate of sorts, but where we arrived was that 99.9% of our approaches to diet are completely aligned. And it's just that 0.1% where there's room for debate. But the debate doesn't have to be inflamed, no pun intended. It can be evidence-based, it can be productive. And I just want to celebrate you for being such an important voice in the space. And even though we don't necessarily agree on everything, we don't have to.
Yeah, I don't think we have to either. And I actually think that episode, so I actually didn't see it as a debate. And I think if we had, that might, if I'd come into this thinking we're going to have a debate, I don't know if it would have come out the same way, right? Whereas when you come in and you say, we're going to have a friendly conversation, and I acknowledge that he sees things slightly differently than I do, and we're going to work together to explore where is the common ground between us and what are the things that we're slightly different on, and that's okay. And ultimately the message, and I literally wrote this in my new book, that to me the best diet is going to be the one that you're actually willing to do. And part of the discussion in my new book is that there are many forms of a healthful diet. It's not trying to identify the supreme dietary choice, to me is a silly exercise, because that's not true for everyone, nor is everyone willing to actually do that. So let's figure out how we can basically onboard people with a higher quality diet and then achieve results, feel the difference.
Amen. Yeah, you're right. It wasn't a debate. It was a conversation. And yeah, it was one of my favorites. So I'm super excited to have you back. I'm very excited to celebrate your new book. And inflammation is a big topic. You hear a lot about inflammation on social media. It's a bit of a buzz term in the wellness circles online. Maybe we can start with, before we get into the solution and how to fight inflammation by way of diet, maybe you can define it for us.
So inflammation is, first of all, it's not a bad thing, right? We evolved to have inflammation to protect our body. So acute inflammation, which I would argue is good inflammation, is the response of your immune system to a threat that could be an infection, or it could be bodily injury, right? Or things like this. It is either the elimination of a toxin or a threat, a bacteria or a virus, or it's the repair and recovery of your body, right? So inflammation is serving a purpose within that specific context. And there's these products of inflammation where, you get a fever, or something gets red and warm and tender, right? But then ultimately it resolves and it goes away. That is different from chronic low-grade inflammation, which is where we really have a problem. Because in essence, inflammation, in a way, is the activation of our immune system. And chronic low-grade inflammation is where you take basically this military that you have installed mostly into your gut, and you activate them and you have them go to war, and they're in a forever war, right? And anytime that, not to use the war analogy too much, but anytime there's fighting like this, like there's going to be damage. There's going to be fallout from this, right? And unfortunately, the damage that we're talking about here is to your organs. And so, and that burden of injury that comes from chronic low-grade inflammation is what ultimately can manifest throughout our entire body, including our brain, our cognition, our mood, but also affecting our cardiovascular system, affecting our metabolism, affecting our gut, our digestive system and process, affecting our hormones in both men and women. This is where inflammation ultimately shows up. And it's, Max, like, I'll list off some symptoms. So you could be having headache, you could have brain fog, difficulty focusing, difficulty getting through cognitive tasks, like lacking cognitive endurance. You could have congestion in your nose, you could have a sore throat, you could have skin breakouts, so that could be acne, eczema, psoriasis. You could have joint issues, you could have muscle, like just feeling like you got hit by a train, like muscle soreness. You could have difficulty recovering from exercise. You could have digestive symptoms, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, abdominal discomfort. But the number one symptom is fatigue. And you go to 5 different doctors for 5 of those symptoms. And what they don't actually take a moment to do is to tell you that there's this one story that explains all of it. And if we're going to move beyond a symptoms-based approach and actually address the issue, then we need to first acknowledge that this is the problem, and then we need to build a plan to address it directly.
You essentially argue in your book that we can't have a conversation about inflammation without also acknowledging the role that the gut plays in inflammation. Why is that?
So I mentioned a moment ago that 70% of your immune cells are in the lining of your gut. So if you're asking the question, like, where is the home of our immune system? It is your gut, for sure. More so than your spleen, more so than your bone marrow, right? They may get trained in the bone marrow, but then they come out of that basic training and they basically set up shop and they're ready to go to war in the lining of your gut. And I would actually argue, Max, that the immune system is the third layer of defense. So most of us, like even when I went to medical school, I would have thought, hey, your immune system, that's what defends you. That's your main thing. But actually, to me, it's number 3. The first is your gut microbiome. So as we sit here right now, your gut microbiome is serving many different functions. In fact, there's a circadian element to your microbes. But one of them is to protect you from pathogens. And we know this because if we give antibiotics, wipe out the good microbes, then you create an environment, a vacuum, where the bad guys rise up, and next thing you know, you could have an infection, like a C. diff infection, right? So these microbes, that's our first layer of defense. And the second layer of defense is actually your gut barrier. So your entire intestinal system, so 15 feet of small intestine, 5 or 6 feet of large intestine, your colon, is completely carpeted with a single layer of cells held together by these proteins called tight junctions, which are kind of like the cement. And the gut barrier, from my perspective, is the most important, largest immune organ that we have. Because when it's intact, it keeps the bad stuff out and it only lets the good stuff in. And when it's intact, it protects the immune system. So the immune system is safe and not triggered and more capable and able to do its job. Like basically, if there is a real threat, your immune system will take it out, right? But when the gut barrier is weak and broken down, then we're allowing things to sneak across, which I may refer to as increased intestinal permeability. Other people use the language leaky gut. I don't have a problem with that. Like we're talking about the same thing, things getting across that weren't supposed to get across. And the problem is once you've gotten through phase 2, which is the gut barrier, then it comes into contact with the immune system. Now the immune system is forced to react. But if this is an ongoing issue of the gut barrier is weak because our gut microbes are weak, I should mention the gut microbes, they're the stewards of the gut barrier. They're the ones that are helping to repair and restore it. So when the microbes get weak, the gut barrier gets weak. And when that happens, you create this intestinal permeability. And now you've just created chronic low-grade inflammation.
Whoa. Yeah, the gut inflammatory axis that's fascinating.
Yeah, and in my book, I asked a basic question. if I come on Max's show, how many health conditions can I look at Max and tell him there are this many health conditions associated with inflammation, and I have a study to back up every single one of them. And I found over 130.
Wow.
Yeah. And some of them are rare. So like the problem is like rare conditions, they don't necessarily have these types of studies. So I found over 130 health conditions. And of course it's autoimmune issues and allergic issues, but it's also cognitive issues like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. It's mood disorders. It's hormonal issues. I should have mentioned earlier that perimenopause and menopause and female fertility are all related to inflammation on some level. So it's women's hormones. In men, it's testosterone levels, it's sperm counts, it's erectile function in men. Right. So inflammation is touching all these different points. It affects our metabolism. So like think about metabolic diseases that we deal with. They're all related to inflammation. So this is, if you look, 3 out of 5 causes of death in America are inflammatory health conditions. And this list of 130, not all of them are going to kill us. So like basically what I'm saying is it's far reaching. Right. So then the second question that I asked is, how many of these can I prove that there's dysbiosis, meaning disruption of the gut microbiome? The answer was basically all of them.
Wow.
There's one, which is renal artery stenosis, that you could debate me on that one. But generally speaking, all of them. And I also looked at like how many of them are there studies to show increased intestinal permeability? Probably like 60% of them. Wow. The rest just don't have a study at all. So this entire idea of, your gut being connected so powerfully to your immune system that they are inseparable is absolutely true. And we can look at that and see it as like a negative thing, right? That, okay, we're dealing with these inflammatory issues. There's an epidemic out there. But we could also turn that around and see it as a positive, which is that the gut is an opportunity for healing. If you heal the gut microbes, which can happen quite quickly, then they can fix the gut barrier for us. By the way, every 3 to 5 days, you install a brand new gut barrier. There's no other part of your body that's even close to that quick in terms of replacing itself. I mean, imagine if you had a new liver every 3 days, right? So as we sit here, every 1 second, you and I are both creating 450,000 new cells.
Damn.
In our gut.
How miraculous is biology? It's incredible.
I mean, I think that there's a highly compelling argument that the more that you learn from a scientific perspective, the more that it makes you believe in something bigger.
Wow. I love that. Damn. Yeah. It's just so, it's so beautiful, nature. It's incredible. So how do we make our gut bugs happy then?
We have options. I think that the approach starts with first acknowledging, like, how did we get here? Right? So part of my thesis is that there was a pattern to life and it matched our biology, and we maintained that pattern for the most part for a really long time. And then we developed some really crazy technology like electricity. Like it's not that long ago that did not exist, right? Let alone electronics that have brought us up and where we're going with AI and all this. But like that's like the cutting edge. But we first must acknowledge that life for our grandparents was radically different than life today, right? When my grandparents were born around 1918, like there were no car. Very few people had cars. They didn't have a car in their family, right? Like they basically had to get around. You either walked or rode your bike to school. There was no such thing as a television. If you wanted to entertain yourself, you played with other kids outside. You were outdoors for many hours per day. You were more connected to other people, right? The food, you knew your farmer, you knew your butcher, right? You knew your baker. Like you had access to clean food. There was like not this industrial process that creates our food that we have today, right? So, and we have come so far from that.
I was reading in your book, 73%, 3/4 of your average supermarket are ultra processed foods now.
Yeah, it's not surprising if you think about it, right? Because it's like basically the 25% that outlines the center, but the entire center is ultra processed.
It's true.
Yeah. And like just think about those foods that like sit there and they're there who knows how long, right? And haven't changed one bit. And it's so, getting back to this idea of like, there was a pattern and we like completely moved in a different direction. And now the pattern is incompatible with our biology, right? In that, Max, we have normalized things that are not normal. And we look at them as if they are. It's like pretty wild to think of what the human brain is capable of processing, where things are clearly not normal, but you're accepting them as true.
So there are obviously so many variables have changed over the course of the modernization of life in the 21st century. You mentioned, we're not outside as much. We're less engaged with nature. We're more sedentary than we've ever been before. But let's talk about the industrialization of our food supply. What are the consequences to gut health and ultimately the impact that this is all ultimately having on inflammation? What are the consequences of the industrialization of our food supply on gut health?
So your gut microbes tell a story. And it is, in a way, it's the story of your life. Everything that you do ultimately gets reflected in them. Now, your diet, to me, is the most powerful lever that you can pull. And what we've done is we've drifted from what was, as I described a moment ago, a whole food diet, right? Like for the most part. We've drifted from that to where now, the ultra-processed foods are dominating our world. So the average adult in the United States, 60% of their calories comes from ultra-processed foods. And in our kids, it's worse. So because the problem is if you stock the pantry and the food was designed to hack their brain, what do you think they're going to eat? So in our kids, it's 70% of calories come from ultra-processed foods. Now the math says that for every 10%, there is a 14% increased risk of death. So if you take 14 and multiply it by 7, you don't have to be a math genius. It's scary. And that's our kids, right? That's how we're raising them right now. Like we are growing up, Max. Basically, our generation started with us on an ultra-processed diet, right? For the first time. Like we are the first generation that kind of has gone through this. And so there are some specific elements that warrant being called out directly. So first, if you were to break fat into its component parts, right? No longer are you allowing it to exist in its natural form. No longer are you allowing what is called the food matrix, which is the structure, the inherent structure of the food. Now you're going to extract things in a quite unnatural way. So we're going to basically extract the sugar. We're going to grind things into a powder, which is a flour, right? We're going to take unhealthy forms of fat. We're going to take amounts of salt that you aren't going to find in nature, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to recreate things using these smaller pieces, and you put them back together. But in the process of doing this, there's a trick that we've discovered. So if you and I had a food company, Max, I have a hack that would allow us to sell way more products, which is that among these three things, refined carbohydrates, unhealthy fats, and salt, if I can introduce at least 2 out of 3 in levels that you will not find in nature, right? That basically your brain gets triggered because it comes across something that's like, whoa, what's that? All right. If you get 2 out of 3, you have created a hyper-palatable food. And this is the work of Kevin Hall, where basically he looked at, control for the factors, basically keep the macros the same, right? And make them one factor that's different between the two. One is an ultra-processed diet and the other is a minimally processed diet. And basically what he found was that when you give people the freedom to eat until they feel full, on the ultra-processed diet with everything else being the same, they will consume 500 calories more per day. Well, that in 1 week equals 1 pound of fat.
Yikes.
Right. So 52 weeks, you could gain a lot of weight in a year. So this is the starting point. And that combination of 3 things is basically the hallmark of a Western diet, right? And as I was researching the book, I asked another question: how many different health conditions are associated with a Western diet, a Western dietary pattern? And I found 55. So now the rest of the 130, they just haven't studied yet, right? But so far, 55 of them, increased risk in association with a Western diet. So, and we haven't even touched on the food additives, let alone our farming practices. And I think from my perspective, whether we're talking about the production of plants and some of the farming practices that exist there, or we're talking about concentrated feeding lots and the use of antibiotics, right? I take issue with both. Because basically we're not creating healthy food. And, this is perhaps an oversimplification, but I think it's important to just say, if our food is unhealthy, how can it possibly be healthy for us, right? So I really sincerely believe that we have to get back to more whole food based and ideally from clean sources.
So I want to drill in. Would you say that the battleground really is on our tongues, where these foods are just so delicious that ultimately the mechanism by which they're harming us is because we're over consuming them? Or is there something to the nature of these foods that's driving disease?
Functional MRI studies would suggest that the way in which our body reacts to these foods is conceptually similar to the way that a person reacts if they're addicted to drugs. Wow. Right. And I think that it would be fair to look out at America that basically is making themselves progressively more sick, progressively more metabolically unwell, progressively more obese, right? And to look out at America and say, it looks like food addiction, because you can't get yourself to stop when you actually want to, which is really sad.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's fair to totally just chalk it up to a willpower thing, right? And this is actually part of where the GLP-1s, we could have a conversation about the nuance of GLP-1s and where they fit. But this is actually one of the things where GLP-1s, they're helpful because actually it disrupts that food addiction.
Is there any research on the impact of GLP-1 drugs on the gut microbiome? I wonder.
So if you properly used, I don't have statistics on how many people are using it for vanity purposes, right? But properly used in a person who's obese or morbidly obese, right? Those are the people that really need these drugs.
Yeah.
And they lose weight. They lose 15 to 30% body mass. Anytime you take a person who is metabolically unwell, and you can't get to obesity without being metabolically unwell, and you help them to get back closer to metabolic balance, perhaps not perfect, so many different parts are going to fall into alignment. You improve their insulin sensitivity, you lower their blood pressure, you reduce postprandial triglyceridemia, and you reduce inflammation, right? And within the context of all of those factors, the gut microbiome does become more healthy. That being said, one of the issues that exists is that if you take a person who's on a junk diet and you say, I got your solution, here's this drug, right? Which is basically what's happening. They'll lose weight because they're restricting their caloric intake, but we haven't actually taught them how to eat. We haven't taught them how to improve the nutritional quality of their diet. We haven't taught them how to protect their muscle mass, which they're going to sacrifice in the process of losing weight. So there are massive lost opportunities in the vast majority of people who are using these drugs because the framework is not appropriately giving them the guidance they need to thrive. So if you take a junk diet and you cut it down by calories substantially, you're completely exposing yourself in terms of deficiencies.
Now you're just under eating a junk food diet.
You're under eating a junk food diet, and what probably was borderline in terms of nutritional deficiencies, now you're completely exposed.
Wow. Well, you do talk a lot about the role of fiber, which I want to talk about.
Do I like that?
Fiber?
Yeah.
Yeah. I believe you're known, in fact, for it's a big part of your brand, Dr. B.
Am I allowed to take credit for Fibermaxxing by writing a book
I think
before?
you can actually.
Yeah.
Yes. It's now a trend on social media. Fibermaxxing.
Yeah.
What actually is it? What is that?
Okay. So this is an example. I'm not a TikTok guy. I've turned into my dad. But this is an example where TikTok actually is getting it right, which is shocking to me. The only issue is they're basically going hard. So like Fibermaxxing is where you're like cranking up your fiber as much as you can. And my thing is like, look, I do want you to increase your fiber intake because 95% of America is deficient in fiber. Like I do want you to address this issue. But when you crank it too hard all at once, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? You're not going to feel well. And then when you don't feel well, you're going to be like, oh, this Fibermaxxing thing was total trash.
As a gut health doctor, what are the pros and cons of Fibermaxxing?
The pro is that you actually have the audacity to address the issue that 19 out of 20 people are not addressing, which is fiber deficiency. And I think that fiber, like to contextualize fiber, this is the way that I would put it, and please feel free to push back if you feel otherwise. I see protein as being like, this is the elemental piece of muscle, right? This is the building block of muscle. And muscle is not just looking good and being strong. It's not just vanity. To me, muscle is a dominant metabolic organ, right? So I am 100% on board with like our need to build muscle. Yet at the same time, fiber is the longevity nutrient from my perspective. And the reason why is because not only do you get the gut microbiome in alignment, not only do you actually fix the gut barrier, because what comes from fiber is what you need to create those cells and piece them together, but also fiber basically transforms into short chain fatty acids, acetate, propionate, and butyrate, that have effects on your metabolism and specifically effects on your immune system. And so you're actually reducing inflammation directly. So basically like these three pieces, if the thesis is that we need to heal the gut microbiome, which repairs and restores the gut barrier, which basically suppresses the immune system and gets it into alignment, I'm saying to you that through prebiotic fiber, which is basically soluble fiber, you can achieve all three of those things in one move. And 19 out of 20 people are like way deficient.
Yeah, I mean, most people today get, what is it, like less than 15 grams of fiber?
So the average woman in the United States is 15. The average man in the United States is 18. The recommended amount for women is 25. And the recommended amount for men is 38. So basically, like women are only 60% of where they should be for the minimum. Like not optimal, the minimum. And men, we're less than 50% of where we should be.
The dietary guidelines are interesting. For the recommendation is typically, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories consumed.
That's right.
Are you aligned with that?
I'm aligned with that, and that's where the 25 and the 38 actually come from. So it's based upon a typical caloric intake for a woman or a man.
So interesting.
But like I would bet, so I actually don't track my own fiber. Like if anything, what I do is I track the number of different plants in my diet just for fun. And I eat for variety, right? This is like a big concept that I believe in and I've been talking about. But I actually bet that you are like within range for fiber, if not like well above. Like I bet you're like 50 or 60.
Me personally?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I've actually tracked my fiber intake. I'm 30, 40 grams a day.
Yeah.
Typically at a minimum, but I would say that that's probably the average. Like I would be surprised if I, ever dipped below 25 grams a day.
Right. So yeah. So I think like if we want, it's important for people to hear that fiber and protein are not mutually exclusive choices. They're not in competition with each other.
Hey man, I love hearing you say that. Because sometimes on social media, they do seem, it's like you're either in the protein camp or the fiber camp.
Well, last time I was on, and by the way, for the listeners at home, if you haven't listened to that episode, you should.
It was phenomenal.
It was good. Last time you and I were on, like basically we're on the exact same page in terms of protein intake.
That's what I said. Yeah, 100%. It's super important. And they play different roles in health.
And what I said last time, and I'm going to say it again, is I also though think that like we fixate on the protein so much, but actually protein needs to be matched to your bodily needs, right? So you don't want to be like contextually deficient where you're working out, but you don't have enough essential amino acids to actually build your muscle. And so therefore you can only take it so far, right? You don't want that situation. But the problem that we have in America is that the vast majority of people are not working out. So like to me, if we're really getting serious, phase one is like we need people in the gym. Every guy should be doing strength training. And I actually think that like the narrative around women's health for a really long time has completely missed this opportunity to talk about the importance of strength training for women, right? Like they make it sound like cardiovascular, like running or yoga, like those are your choices. No, that's not true. Like women should be working out just like us. Maybe not the exact same way, but resistance training is step one.
Step one. So what are your favorite food-based sources then of fiber?
Okay, so we have tons of choices, right? So every plant-based food has fiber. If I were to say what's like super jammed packed, where if you want to get maximum bang for your buck and simultaneously you can get healthy fat, I would go seeds. So chia seeds, basil seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, jam-packed with fiber. They do have protein. Hemp seeds are pretty decent for protein. I mean, it's not crazy, but it's definitely there. And healthy fats, you have omega-3 fats in there, right? So we're actually addressing multiple things that our body needs because the omega-3 fats are essential fats. So that means we have to get them from our diet. I actually think the avocado is like a low-key like fiber superstar. So because we always talk about avocados as being fat, right? And what you're totally missing is that a medium-sized avocado could have 10 or 12 grams of fiber.
That's right.
Right. So that's an amazing way to like crank your fiber up because it's delicious. You're happy, right? You're satiated, and you just increased your fiber intake by 10 or 12 grams.
Avocado is also amazing for cognitive function. Great brain food. One of my favorite. I actually think avocados are the best brain fruit. Berries tend to get all the love, and berries are great. Don't get me wrong. Berries are amazing. But avocados are also a fruit. And I think like when you actually look at what's in an avocado, you get there's a lot of bang for your buck.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And, but within the space of berries, like raspberries, tons of fiber and actually very easily digested by people who have gut issues. So if you're listening to the show and you're a little bit apprehensive because you're worried that the fiber is going to hurt you, then like starting with raspberries is a great place to start.
Why do some people claim on social media that they feel better when they reduce their fiber intake? Like, how do you reconcile all those anecdotes?
Yeah, it's real. It's the nuance of fiber. I wish it were so easy that it was just black and white and I didn't have to actually explain it. But that's not the way the body always works. So your gut is a muscle. It can be trained. It can be made stronger. Fiber is exercise for your gut. This is the equivalent of that gut muscle working out. Okay. So when the capacity for work is in alignment with the amount of fiber intake, you should feel well. But if your gut is weak and you go hard with the fiber, that's like going to the gym and trying to lift way more weight than you have any business lifting, right? You have to match the amount of fiber to what your gut is capable of processing and digesting. So for people who are just getting started on this journey, don't go too hard, don't go too fast. I always say start low, go slow. And basically then, much like exercise, you go into the gym, you start with an amount that your body can actually handle, and then over time you're able to increase. Like you didn't get to where you are today in terms of your fitness by waking up one day and working out super hard.
Exactly.
Right? It was a build.
Yeah, definitely not overnight. So the take home then is like if you want to increase your fiber, which most people should, listening to this, go slowly.
Go slowly, right? And if you do that, and you listen to your body, and if you feel like, hey, that was too much, you could slow it down, right? But like basically, you just need to match the fiber to what your gut's capable of doing.
What do you make of the proliferation of fiber-enriched, ultra-processed foods?
Yeah. Honestly, I'm not a fan. The issue from my perspective is that there's fiber that naturally exists in the matrix of food. And then there are extracts, which are monofibers. You must understand, Max, that like every plant is going to have a blend, like a fingerprint, a unique blend of fiber, many different strains and types, in the same way that different protein sources, they have unique types of protein, right? With a different mix of amino acids. So like fiber and protein, there's some similarities there in terms of the way they behave. So, and when we talk about these ultra processed fiber sources, we're really talking about inulin for the most part. And inulin is extracted chemically, right, from Jerusalem artichoke or whatever it might be, or chicory root. Okay, so you extract the inulin, and then you take this monofiber and you basically like drop it into a beverage, okay, like a bubbly type of thing. And now you can make health claims because you have provided a sufficient amount to achieve a health claim. So in terms of greenwashing, health washing, that's a great win if you're a brand, right? Now, from my perspective, here's my pushback as a gastroenterologist and gut microbiome expert. Number one, that is the cheapest source of fiber. People don't even realize how cheap that is. Like, it's like a joke. You just paid 3 times as much for that can of soda, and you could have bought that inulin for a few pennies. Literally. Number two, there is no other source of fiber that will produce more gas in your body than inulin. Okay, so Max, you've heard of a low FODMAP diet.
Yeah, heard of it, yeah.
Okay, so low FODMAP diet is what people do to like try to reduce fermentation, reduce gas and bloating, right? And like well studied in irritable bowel syndrome. Okay, so that concept is to reduce FODMAPs. Inulin is purified FODMAP. Like you are like basically supercharged gas production right there.
Dude, I went to my brother's house a couple weeks ago for Thanksgiving, and they had there was on the counter on the kitchen island, they had found on Amazon some like sugar-free marshmallow product that they were auditing for the sweet potato mash that we love to put marshmallows on top of.
Sure.
So they went on Amazon, they found this like sugar-free marshmallow product. I forget the brand name, but they were really tasty. So I wanted to try one. I ended up eating like 8 of them, but they were very low calorie. So I was like, what's the harm, right? Yeah. Like I marshmallow maxed on these like sugar-free marshmallows. Bro, I felt so bad for my family because I could not stop farting.
Yeah.
It was just, and I looked on the back of the package, and within the top like 3 ingredients, it was artichoke fiber, like artichoke inulin or something like that.
Yeah.
I was like, so I was uncomfortable. I was embarrassed. My stomach, it had turned my gut into a fermentation factory. And it was not pleasant.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you overdid it on the inulin in this case. And I'm sorry that ruined Thanksgiving for your family, but
it was unrelenting. It was crazy.
All right, so but if you take that, the inulin,
I'm not prone to that either. Like it was like I was like, what is going on?
Yeah, yeah. You had never been exposed to such concentrated sources of gas production, basically.
There needs to be a warning label.
Yeah, there should products. Be. Yeah. And if you add this to a carbonated drink, it's a total setup for people to feel bloated. Right? Like, so you're trying to work on your gut and you're making yourself bloated in the process. But here's the last part that I think is really important for people to hear. There was a study that came out a few years ago where they showed that in humans, that if you take inulin, it can actually cause abnormal liver tests. And at first I kind of dismissed this, like, what's going on with that? And then there was another study where they showed that rats being given this type of fiber, they develop liver cancer. All right, here's what's happening. You're extracting a monofiber and then you're overstuffing it. So when you are consistently providing this inulin, you're overfeeding the bacteria that eat that monofiber. That's an unnatural thing. It doesn't exist in nature. There's no monofibers, right? So even if you ate the same food all the time, it wouldn't be a monofiber. It would be a blend of many forms of fiber. So because you've done this, you're overstuffing those bacteria, then ultimately you get consequences from this. So the point from my perspective, this is not, by the way, an argument against like the totality of fiber supplements. I obviously believe in fiber supplements. I own a supplement company, but also our product is not extracts at all. Like every single ingredient is basically whole food derived and then ground into a powder, right? So it's a different process.
Now, is there a silver lining? I mean, could it be said that, I don't know. I mean, there is like as a byproduct of the fermentation that was occurring, that maybe my bacteria, like, is there a possible health benefit to?
Oh yeah, there's definitely a possible health benefit, right? Because if you take a person, this would be effectively the same as having a carbonated water and an inulin supplement, right? Like they're not different. They're just put together. So, and with the proper amount of inulin supplementation, it might help people. But I don't actually see that as being the solution to this issue. Like we're not going to supplement our way out of this problem, right? Our fiber deficiency is deep and profound. So if we want to get this right, the way for us to approach this is diet first, maximize diet. It's quite simple. You'll find all plant-based foods have fiber. So whatever plant-based food you enjoy, if you consume it, you know you are getting fiber, no questions asked. And we should take that as far as we can. And then once we take it there absolutely is an opportunity to basically like choose supplementation. But if I were choosing supplementation, inulin would not be the choice. That's not the choice.
What are the best forms of fiber to supplement with? Are you a fan of psyllium husk?
Psyllium husk is great. Not everyone is willing to do it. It's got like sort of a gelatinous texture that's not particularly enjoyable. And if you want to get to therapeutic doses with that, you have to go quite high. So like basically therapeutic doses start at 10 grams per day. So, but you have to build to that. Like you should not start at 10 grams per day. You should probably start at like 3 to 5. And then you can slowly increase over possibly 2 weeks. So psyllium husk is like a nice option. Make sure that you get it organic from my perspective. Don't get Metamucil. Metamucil's got like extra colorings and things that are unnecessary in there. Just get plain psyllium that's organic. So other things that exist, there's acacia fiber. There is partially hydrolyzed guar gum. These forms of fiber, they're low FODMAP, so that means that they don't produce as much gas. They're generally well tolerated. So, and then our company, 38 Terra, our product is called Daily Microbiome Nutrition. So I formulated it myself. So the thought process was like, look, everything that you and I are discussing, that's fine, but I also think we could do so much better. That's why I created this. And it's got 7 unique ingredients that include fiber, resistant starch, and polyphenols. So all 3 of those in their own way are influencing gut health and your colon health. Here's the part that's really cool that we have learned. So it turns out that fiber, when it's prebiotic, that's like the soluble fiber, it gets fermented on the right side of your colon. So for people that are listening on or listening but not watching on YouTube, I'm basically tapping my right side. All right, that's the first part of your colon. So that's like right where your small intestine connects. All right, so basically like boom, 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 gets chewed up real fast. The resistant starch, which you can find in our product, but you can also find in any starchy food that you heat and cool. So it could be potatoes, could be those sweet potatoes, could be legumes, right? You heat them up, you cool them down. You could take bread, and if you put it in the freezer, you actually create resistant starch. Resistant starch actually bypasses the right colon, keeps going, and enters in the left colon, and it feeds those microbes. So between those 2 things, you're basically creating total colonic health, total colonic nutrition. And then the polyphenols, in case people are wondering what I'm talking about, you've heard of these. It's resveratrol, it's quercetin, it's curcumin and turmeric. Right? You've heard of these. What you don't realize is that these polyphenols, they're big molecules. So what that means is that we're not actually able to digest them. We're not able to absorb them until they come into contact with our microbes. And then when they do, the polyphenol gets activated, gets absorbed. We get the health benefit of the curcumin, right? The anti-inflammatory effect. We get the health benefit of like protecting us from cardiovascular disease and cancer from the quercetin. So, but that comes from the microbes. And then the microbes are changed. And those polyphenols have shifted the microbes, where now you could give the exact same amount of fiber and actually get higher and higher levels of short-chain fatty acids. So we commissioned a study with a company in Europe that basically runs the world's best microbiome simulation. And we had them feed this, it's a human microbiome from 5 different people. And we had them feed every single day the same amount, which would be like what you would consider 1 serve of our product. And this was one of the things that was really cool. So same amount of fiber every day, but the short chain fatty acid levels rose every single time. So basically the rising short chain fatty acids is basically indicative of a gut microbiome that's creating efficiency and getting better and better and better at producing these anti-inflammatory chemicals for you. So when we do things with consistency, the microbiome adapts to it and gets better at its job. But the second thing real quick, Max, because I think you would really dig this.
Well, wait, so the same dose of prebiotics over time led to higher levels of these short-chain fatty acids.
All 3, acetate, propionate, and butyrate, ended up higher on day 15 than they were on day 3.
Amazing.
And by day 3, they were already up.
Wow.
So like the gut microbiome is quickly going to start to go to work and basically like produce these short-chain fatty acids. But if you actually stick with it and you maintain that consistency, then you're actually remodeling the microbiome to allow it to get better at producing short-chain fatty acids.
That's super cool.
So the other thing that I think you would dig is that there's a big conversation in the probiotic world around Akkermansia, right? So Akkermansia, there are brands that this is what they sell. But Akkermansia, like you and I, we already have this. It's inside of us. And it's a beneficial bacteria. I understand the probiotic concept here. It's good for our metabolism. It's good for our immune system. But I'm here to say that Akkermansia, this is me taking it into like a microbiome expert space. This is a keystone species. So what that means is when your gut is unwell, levels drop. So yeah, we could like replace that with a probiotic. But the counterpoint is when the gut becomes well, levels rise. And it's not just the Akkermansia that are better. That's indicative of the entire system healing. So we don't just want the Akkermansia, we want the whole package. And so basically what we found in this study was we measured the microbiome at 2 time points, day 8 and day 15. And at day 8, there were already changes where like bad guys were dropping, good guys were rising. But the really exciting part was that at day 15, we saw substantially increased levels of Akkermansia. So, and that like basically by itself was everything that I needed to see to be like, this is exactly what we're looking for.
That's incredible. How many times a day should a person poop? Like what's a normal, like what is the normal amount that a person should be pooping on a daily basis?
Okay. So I'm going to give you an answer, but I also want to acknowledge that there's different elements to this equation that I want to introduce. Okay. So generally speaking, most of us would poop once a day. And if you are in circadian alignment, pooping is a part of that story. There are things that occur in the morning. And it's, by the way, not just drinking your coffee, right? It is the exposure to sunlight. It is the rise of cortisol that comes with, I mean, naturally our cortisol is rising, but when we get outside and you get that morning sunlight, you bump that by 50%. You can increase that by 50%. You tack on some morning exercise. I've now given, by the way, your listeners the 2 most powerful circadian levers for a morning routine: outdoor time and exercise of any variety. So if you go light, 25% increase in addition to what you got from the outdoor time. If you go hard, another 50%. So, and then that teaches your body, like basically this is where the day begins. And that cortisol is contributing to the rhythm that ultimately leads to a morning bowel movement where your gut now like basically has a clock, knows what time, and then it happens. The other thing that happens is you activate serotonin. So you activate serotonin, you activate the gut microbes. Max, our gut microbiome It's on a circadian rhythm. So they've shown over 50% of our species are rising and falling during a 24-hour clock to meet the moment. So as we sit here right now, during the day, they're focused on protein metabolism because that's what we need because we're physically active. But then tonight, we go to bed and they're actually going to flip. Like the microbiome is going to flip. And now its functional output is about recovery, helping you to heal, repairing and restoring the gut barrier overnight, right? Inflammation that actually occurs overnight. All right. So the answer to your question, sorry, I got carried into a circadian rhythm thing.
No, it's I never considered the impact that like getting morning light in through your eyes might play in terms of bowel motility.
Okay, so I would challenge the listeners of your show. If you step outside for 7 days in a row, all right, and get morning sunlight, or if you're living in a place where like that's not possible, at least get a light box with 10,000 lux. 10,000 lux is what you want. If you do this for 7 days in a row, I promise you, you will feel more energy. You will have better focus. You have more cognitive endurance. Your mood will improve over a couple of days. The energy will be day one. Your mood will improve over a couple of days. And the other thing that will happen is you will sleep like a baby. Because basically all you did was pull the most powerful circadian tool, the circadian lever that we have, to tell your body, I'm time stamping, this is when the day begins right here. So ultimately that does parlay into a morning bowel movement, and our bowel movements shouldn't be scattershot. So even if you go once a day, but your bowel movements are all over the place, you need chronotherapy, right? You need to get your circadian rhythm back into alignment because your body should know when is the time to poop. Now, in theory, if we took our fiber deficient America and we actually got everyone to fiber sufficiency or fiber optimization, people might be pooping 2 or 3 times a day, right? So the once a day, you could actually argue is us accepting something as normal, but it's kind of not. All right. There are going to be some listeners who they poop every other day. And now they're wondering, oh gosh, do I have a problem? If you feel well and you have healthy bowel movements and you when you go, you feel completely empty and satisfied. You could absolutely poop every other day and that's just your rhythm and that's okay, right? You don't necessarily have a problem. Meanwhile, there are people who poop every single day and they're constipated. And they don't realize it.
Yeah, how does that work?
Okay, so there's a few options here. So first of all, there are people that for me, bathroom time is awesome, right? Like I look forward to that moment. You get that urge, you basically mosey over it into the bathroom, get a good evacuation, and then you strut out of there, right? It's highly satisfying. That's the way it's supposed to be. For people who are suffering with gut issues, that's not their experience, right? It's a struggle. They're straining, they're red in the face, they're white knuckling it, right? And then all of that to get like a little nugget. And they kind of don't feel like they really emptied. And they get up and they go about their day. And then like 45 minutes later, they have to go back and poop again. You didn't poop in the first place. It was a partial, right? There are some people that they go and have these partial poops that they like have to push out. And maybe you had 2 or 3 of them, but actually you're backing up. So that's number one. There are some people that are not completely emptying, and because they're not completely emptying, they're backing up.
Well, should you just, follow-up question, should you stay on the toilet in that case until you get a more complete evacuation? Because some pelvic floor health experts have said, it's not smart to linger on the toilet.
No, you don't want to linger on the toilet because the issue is that when you spend too much time on the toilet, you're actually, through gravity, naturally pulling blood down into those tissues, which basically increases your risk of hemorrhoids. And then so you're going to take this issue that you have where you're straining to poop, and you're going to compound that with all this blood flow into the hemorrhoid tissues, and you're going to give yourself a hemorrhoid.
Whoa.
So, and we don't need that.
No.
All right.
It's fascinating, by the way.
What should you do? Well, if your poop is hard, you should soften it. And one of the ways that yes, you can drink water, okay? But for a lot of people, drinking like hydration alone is not sufficient. Magnesium can be the way to go. So particularly before bedtime. The key though is like, do you take magnesium?
I do, yeah.
Which one do you take?
I take glycinate, and sometimes I take citrate, which I know has that, what's it called? The water
Laxative effect.
Yeah, laxative effect. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I take glycinate too. Glycinate does nothing for pooping, right? It's fantastic for sleep. Magnesium has many health benefits. Magnesium, by the way, is good for your gut barrier. I actually recommend, in chapter 7 of my book, I recommend magnesium as an evening supplement, as a part of my evening stack, okay? But if you want to poop, citrate is one, oxide is my favorite, or magnesium sulfate. So magnesium oxide, magnesium citrate, magnesium sulfate. And you take that before bedtime, and overnight, it helps to pull some water in. And so then if your poop has been hard, we're softening it up, right? So that would be step one. The second thing is we need to get you into a proper pooping position. So the entire concept of a toilet was clearly not informed by the way that we're like supposed to position ourselves to poop. If we were out in nature, we would all do the exact same thing. None of us would try to sit like we're on a toilet. We would all squat, drop a dump, and then like just walk away, right? So that's what we would do. But instead, we're like sitting in an upright position just like this. So the key is that we have to bring our knees above our hips. So that requires us to have something that's at least a couple inches underneath our feet. So if you could have any sort of step, I mean, you can get a squatty potty if you like, but if you have any sort of step or box that you can put your feet on just to get your knees above your hips, that basically aligns your rectum, relaxes the pelvic floor muscles, and it makes a more clear channel for you to drop a dump.
Wow. It's, man, I love this conversation because it might be taboo to some, but it's so important. And I was recently I was at a resort because I was giving a talk at this like event that occurred at this resort down in San Diego. And you know how sometimes like you sit on a toilet and it's like low to the ground? It feels kind of like an old school toilet. And it just feels good. Like it feels like anatomically aligned.
There you go.
I don't have a better way to put it, but like it's a low old school toilet. And then sometimes you end up on these toilets that are like really high up. And I was at this resort and like every toilet from the, in the lobby of the hotel to in the conference area to even in my own room, the toilets were super high. And I was not going properly.
Yeah.
I was not going properly. And the whole time I felt bloated. I felt like my digestion was off. It's an anomaly for me. It's not, I mean, my digestion is normally very good.
Yeah.
But it was the height of the toilets for the 3 days that I was at this resort that completely screwed me.
Yeah. So even if your poop is soft, if the pelvic floor is not aligned, then it's difficult to go. Right. So, and there are some health conditions where people, these are actually the people with the worst constipation. Like they poop once a week. They have what is called pelvic floor dysnergia, where basically like they think that their bottom is relaxing, but actually it's clamping down. And so it's effectively like, if you had a bathtub filled with water, but you're not opening the drain, it doesn't matter what Drano or anything that you put into the bath water. Like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right. You need to open the drain. Right. So for these people, that can be an issue. And it sounds like for you, like that bloating that you experienced, that's classic. That's classic constipation. Like when you back up, you're going to get bloated.
Felt awful. And conversely, what's fascinating is that when you're on like a low to the ground toilet, I feel like the odds are people are learning a lot about my bowels on this episode of the show, but you feel a lot, the odds are a lot higher that you're going to get the holy grail of the wiping experience, which I would describe, or which many people have colloquially termed the ghost wipe.
Oh,
It's a lot more
Glorious.
It's glorious. It's a lot more the norm when you're on an anatomically correct low to the ground toilet.
Yeah.
Would you say that a ghost wipe in a way is an indicator of good gut health?
Well, it's hard for me. That's a great. I haven't had this question before. I can't say for sure that is, but I do think that when you get your rectum, so the issue is that when we're walking around, our rectum is like almost folded over. And when you get yourself into that deep squat, it becomes straight. And so then now you're creating this like straight shot down the luge, right? And then the ghost wipe, like that's probably the product of being in a proper pooping position in that setting.
Is there anything better than a ghost wipe? I mean, it's one of the best. You feel. I mean, with a ghost wipe, there is this sense that you're doing things right.
So,
because conversely, we've all had that experience where there's seemingly no end in sight, to the wiping, and you just have to at a certain point like cut your losses and
well, this is why everyone needs a bidet.
Got a shower nearby,
This is why everyone needs a bidet. Like the bidet is the most. First of all, we got one during the pandemic.
Dude, I cannot live without a bidet.
Oh, it's so great.
Yeah, I have. I definitely I have multiple bidets, and people can buy cheap. There's a company called Tushy. You can buy cheap bidet like toilet attachments.
Yeah. Well, even the ones that are more expensive, they're not that expensive,
and they're worth it.
Right, and they're worth it for sure.
I have a bidet in my bathroom that costs as much as I used to pay in rent in Los Angeles.
What?
But it was the only, because I rent in my house, and it's like this, like they have like this like high-end toilet, I guess. It wouldn't take one of the cheaper attachments, so I had to buy their proprietary bidet, which cost an arm and a leg. But it's got a heated seat and heated water. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, so look, the truth is that a good bowel movement is supposed to be like blissful, for sure. And you can debate what's better, that or a good meal or sex, right? I mean, I think it's in the equation there. Like it's like a good, healthy bowel movement is highly satisfying.
Yeah, when they I learned this recently. I think this is true, that when people bet on horses, like at the equestrian like horse races, when they trot the horses out beforehand, if a horse poops, that's the horse that you bet on.
Oh, yeah. Lost some weight.
It's like good luck.
Yeah,
because
that's interesting.
Because that the horse is feeling good.
I grew up in Saratoga, New York, where they have the horse racing track. Have you ever been there?
No.
Oh man, it's actually really fun. If you're ever in upstate New York, go to Saratoga in the summertime, like August. It's really fun. Yeah, that's very interesting. But to your question of like, can you look at a person's poop and tell what's going on with their gut microbiome? 100% yes. 100% yes. We know that the form actually tells us about what's happening with the microbes. So as you drift away, so a healthy bowel movement is soft, formed, sausage shaped, right? That's the way it's supposed to be. And if we start to drift towards constipation, it's getting hard, it's getting cracky, lumpy, bumpy, and then eventually it's like a hard rabbit pellet, right? That entire transition is associated with specific changes to the gut microbiome. And on the flip side, if you start to drift towards diarrhea, where it's getting loose, and then ultimately it's a plop, and then water, those two, right? So basically, like if you want gut testing, you could do that. But you could also just look in your toilet bowl and it kind of gives you quite a bit of insight. Like to me, the combination of like, what does your bowel movement look like? How do you feel? That tells me a lot.
Fascinating. Well, this is so interesting. I am very excited for people to get their hands on your book. I learned a lot. And poop is, it's something that we all do. We all, go number 2. So I think it's really important not to suffer in silence if you are having digestive issues. There are a lot of options out there. There's a lot of optionality. I'm just grateful that you're out there, you're on social media, you're providing really valuable content for people, because it is a big thing. I mean, you hear like, hot girls have stomach problems, like a trend on social media, right? Like a lot of people struggle with issues related to their gut health.
100%. And like to me, this whole, connection between gut health and inflammation, right? Like we need to bring consciousness to that, right? So you're not just suffering with those bloating symptoms, those gut related symptoms, you're basically putting yourself at risk for these broader health conditions. So we have an opportunity where if we can address our gut, and the book is like basically giving you the tools to do that, talking about like what are the constructs of an anti-inflammatory diet? What are the choices that we can make? It's not the label that we apply, right? It's the quality of the food and it's the specific nutrients that we're pursuing, right? Talking about that, talking about how do we get ourselves into a circadian rhythm. You and I started to touch on it, but that like we just touched the surface, right? There's your morning routine, there's your meal timings, there's time restricted eating, there's sleep and your evening routine. All of these things are essential for our circadian rhythm. There's the supplement stacks, right? Which I'm a believer that like we're not going to out supplement our diet, but we can optimize and we should. Why would we not? I mean, it's silly not to. And then last but not least, my favorite chapter, Max, is chapter 8, which is basically a conversation about these other aspects of our life that I think are critically important. Human connection, spiritual purpose, right? The impact of trauma, and understanding how those things, this is not, like we have dismissed those things as woo-woo for way too long. They're not. Loneliness is, first of all, epidemic in America. Over half of America complained of being lonely before the pandemic started. And if you report yourself as feeling lonely, that's like in terms of the impact on your mortality, it's the equivalent of smoking a half a pack of cigarettes every day. So these are important things. And there's an entire physiology activated through the brain-gut connection and our autonomic nervous system, sympathetic versus parasympathetic, that basically explains how trauma, how human connection, how spiritual purpose ultimately impact that balance within our body, which affects our gut, which affects our immune system. And this is why these things are anti-inflammatory. So I think that there's this bigger like conversation. It's not just food, right? For some people it's food, but for some people it's basically chronotherapy and aligning their circadian rhythm. And for some people it's like reconnecting with others or like understanding their purpose and why they're here. And that all sort of comes together in the final chapter, which is a 3-phase protocol to help people to put it together where you like, here are the tools. We're going to put the tools on the table. You choose what works for you. And let's actually start to do this like with consistency.
Brilliant. Yeah. I love that you underscored that it would be a mistake to mistake food for the entirety of the pie. It's one slice of the pie.
Yeah.
And health ultimately is multifactorial. So thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah, I think healing comes from many places, right? So I've had people, Max, that I'm sure you can relate to this. Like they do everything right. They're eating the diet, they're exercising, they're sleeping, they're meditating. They're not getting better, right? And then eventually you get to a point where like you realize there's something going on here. Maybe it's in their past. Maybe it was from their childhood. Maybe it's a current relationship. Maybe it's how they feel at work. But like there's something that's holding them back. And once you identify what that thing is and you address that for them, because the issue is like basically what's happening there is like whether it's the trauma or like this current, disrupted relationship with another person, it's activating their sympathetic nervous system perpetually, which is like basically nonstop foot on the gas. And that sacrifices your gut. And so in order to take your foot off the gas, they have to address the issue. And that actually, for me as a gastroenterologist, is the greatest healing that I've ever witnessed in my career.
Really?
100%. Because I can tell people to increase their fiber intake and that's cool, right? Will they improve their health in most people? Yes. But for the people who have this other need, that's their form of healing. And it's so powerful because they're almost like a rocket ship that's trying to take off, but it's chained down. And so if you release the chains, it just like blasts. So it's really cool.
Wow. No, I love that. Well, thanks, Dr. B, for coming out. Where can people find you on social media, and where can they pick up your new book, Plant Powered Plus?
Plant Powered Plus is available everywhere that books are sold. But by the way, can I say something real quick about the title? I'll
Yeah.
be in mind.
Yeah, please.
Okay, cool. So this title, Plant Powered Plus, I just want to be upfront about something, which is to say, like, to me, plant powered is me saying we have many options of how we approach our diet, right? Ultimately, the diet that's going to work for you is the one you're actually willing to do. So I want to help you like accept your own individuality and find the form that's going to work for you, but within a framework where there's sufficient fiber, there's sufficient polyphenols, right? So we have to include the plants in order to achieve those things because that's what's going to power our gut health. So that to me is what being plant powered is. It's not one thing, right? And it's not the total restriction and elimination of certain groups of things. It's about what you're adding, trying to add. And then the plus is like this conversation that goes beyond the plate, where we're getting into circadian rhythm, getting into supplement stacks, getting into time-restricted eating and human connection, spiritual connection, trauma. So anyway, so that is the concept. Plant Powered Plus is available everywhere their books are sold. I know that you can appreciate as an author that I always think it's nice if you go to your local bookstore, because these local mom and pop shops, like, you don't think they're under pressure? What percentage of books are bought online right now, right? So, but I like going into those places. I enjoy like a Saturday with a cup of coffee, browsing. So in order for that to continue to exist, we have to actually buy books from them.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then you can come to my website, theguthealthmd.com. I have tons of free resources. I have a free email newsletter that's basically a Substack. And you can learn about all the other things that I'm doing, where basically, like, to me, a great introduction is to grab the book, sign up for my newsletter, and then we can continue the conversation.
There's also the website bookshop.org,
Yeah.
which is, I believe if you order a book from bookshop.org, it directly goes to support independent bookstores.
That's right, they do. It doesn't. It's not necessarily your local bookstore, but it does. You know, I'm a big believer in like your local community and these people that live with you. Yeah.
Amen. Well, thanks again, brother. Thanks for coming out. Always a pleasure. And thank you guys for listening. Share this episode with friends and loved ones that may benefit from it. And get yourself a bidet. They're great.
That's your homework.
That's your homework. I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Peace. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.